Okay, so when I started off at Waze 7.5 years ago, we were not thinking about using city as a lab. We were thinking about how to get people from point A to point B and find the best, most efficient route through a city. Then I had a meeting with the mayor of Rio, Mayor Pais, in 2014, and he asked me, please, do whatever you can, use my city as a lab, close streets if you need to, but we need to figure out how we're going to prepare for the World Cup and for the Olympics. So we said, okay, let's start with two things that we know already. One, we know that we have the most drivers out there on the roads, crowdsourcing the information just by driving. And we know that that's so much information that we needed to share it beyond just people who are using Waze. So sharing it with cities seemed like an obvious place to start. Cities were then in the dark. They didn't know what was happening where on their streets, so we knew we could help. The other thing we knew about our data is that it wasn't good enough, because if we missed one road closure, the disappointment in our users could really negatively impact our product and our experience. So we came up with a data exchange program, and we started with Rio as an example. And it was very simple. We share incident data with cities that's completely anonymized, and they share closures and incidents back with us. That was 2 years ago. Today, we work with over 200 partners. This is cities, departments of transportation, ministers of transportation, and this represents about 1 billion people in the world in these areas. And it's gone way beyond just sharing data. We've really been able to create a community of people across cities, across the world, that want to reinvent together. So the critical thing for us was, if we're going to use a city as a lab, we need a very good experimentation framework for that to work. We always wondered, okay, if we can save people 5 minutes a day, that's great, but we could never really measure it. But at city scale, it becomes even more interesting and more important. I'm going to give you 3 quick examples. First, let's look at Jakarta. This is a city that has 2 million commuters every morning, every afternoon, a city of about 10 million people. And they have a huge problem with traffic. In fact, it looks like this every single day. It's complete chaos. And that problem costs them about $15 billion a year to try to deal with. Now, what were they doing? They had a policy where you had to have 3 people in a vehicle to be in the downtown area. But of course, people were figuring out ways to smuggle other people into the car, having fake mannequins in the car, whatever it was not helping. And so they worked with some of our other partners, and they worked with us to come up with a different solution that they wanted to test. This was in the summer, and they decided to look at license plate-based routing. This is when you have, based on the last 2 digits of your license plate, it determines what days of the week you can go through the center of the city. They learned this from our partners in Sao Paulo, and they implemented a test. In that test, the results were very good, so they decided to roll it out as the new policy. That new policy has reduced congestion by 19% in one of the most congested cities in the world. So that's not a bad start. That's just with being able to analyze data about what's happening in a city. Another example, going back to Rio, it's a city of about 6.5 million people, and they were going to have to accommodate 1 million new people into the city for the Olympics. They had no idea how they were going to do that and not devolve into gridlock. So we took the mayor's advice and we used the city as a lab. We did some practice runs. We shared a lot of information back and forth with each other about what was happening in real time. And what they decided to do is use that data to create 3 new highways just for the Olympics. I mean, traffic is also terrible in Rio, so they needed to handle this anyway. But this allowed them to have a very good Olympic season. And in addition, they had a decrease in congestion of 27%. So this is using data that we all know, love, collect, and it's making an impact in the real world that's changing our mobility. I'm going to give you one more example that's not about congestion. We have about 15 emergency response agencies that use our data in addition to their 911 or emergency services. About 63% of all of the calls that are coming into their emergency numbers don't have a location. Makes it very difficult to figure out how to go solve a problem or get somebody the help that they need. At the same time, about 30,000 crashes a day are reported on Waze. And of course, they have location embedded in them. About 70% of all of those crashes that come into Waze come in earlier through us than through the phone calls, than through the 911. 70% come in faster than through the traditional emergency mechanisms. What that means is for those 15 agencies that are using this crowdsourced data, they're able to shave 4 minutes off of their response time. That's saving real lives. So these are the kinds of mobility challenges we look at, and these are the kinds of things we're working on, the big problems we're trying to solve with cities. But still, that only gets us to issues related to traffic problems of today. We also realize that there are a lot of infrastructure problems in cities. One of our engineers was driving in Boston, and if any of you have ever driven in Boston, you know that there are miles of tunnels that have exits, and GPS doesn't work in tunnels. So what happens? People pass their exit, they back up in a tunnel, they create traffic jams, they create accidents. And this doesn't just happen in Boston, it happens everywhere. So we created a beacon. These beacons are placed at intervals throughout the tunnel so that you can actually navigate through these tunnels. Because of this partner network that we have around the world, we're already beta testing in about 5 cities right now, including Paris. And so having that channel, having partners around the world that want to work together to improve mobility in their cities already is a great start. But data is interesting, the algorithms are interesting. What we do well at Waze, traditionally, is being able to engage a community of people who want to participate. So for us, it's been traditionally a community of drivers. But what you're seeing here is a community of mayors, of traffic operations center managers, of data scientists together in Paris about a month ago, sharing data, sharing code, sharing case studies, sharing information. Because we're not looking at just the mayor of Rio saying to us, you can close one of our roads, we can do a pilot, and we can expand it in our city. What we want to see is that our partner, Sao Paulo, is doing an experiment. All of the rest of the cities have access to that data, and if it's successful, it can roll out across the world. This is what's very, very interesting about that combination of massive data, data analytics, and a community. The reason this is important is why? Because we all know it's coming. It's a massive revolution in transportation. What does it look like? Well, we know today it's not uncommon for a family to have 2 vehicles, which are parked 95% of the time, and the people are driving alone to work. This is just a reality. Gasoline-powered cars in cities that revolve around a car culture as opposed to a human-centered culture. And we know what's in the future. The perfection of self-driving cars and everyone carpooling together, right? It's all electric. We don't have fossil fuels. We love the future. In the future, we don't have to stop at tolls to pay them. Our car can just do that automatically. In the future, cars are off the road because drones will do delivery. In the future, autonomous vehicles make sure that nobody has to worry about driving. It reduces accidents. But at the end of the day, what really matters is how to get those cars off the road, and that's not going to be because of a self-driving car. In fact, the self-driving car is essentially going to be the PC of the future. And what makes this whole ecosystem valuable? The software. So we're looking now at what are the interesting points in transportation as a service. What are the service providers, the software providers that are sitting on top in between all of those fancy self-driving cars? And that's what we think is incredibly interesting. And that's not a distant future, right? Obviously, it matters when we have self-driving cars, but it matters today. And you've seen it, it's Uber, it's Lyft, it's Cabify, it's Carpool, it's the Vanpool, it's a self-driving bus that you guys have somewhere in this hall. It's those services. And why does transportation as a service matter so much? Because whoever delivers the most drives, they are the services that collect the most data. And data remains the most valuable part of mobility going forward. And so I would be looking at, if I were you, the business models and the opportunities that are really within transportation as a service. And let's not get too excited about autonomy because it's coming, but it's the PC. Okay, so we've got our future mapped out. What's the impact of all of this? Both the transportation as service and this future of mobility. Well, I think it's nothing short of reshaping our cities. I have a little bit of research here that I did with the city of Los Angeles. In fact, this is LA County. This is a map of LA County, the prototypical car culture capital of the world. Let's look at how much space is taken up directly by vehicles in LA County. So if you look at all of the cars passed together, it's only about 0.5% of the square mileage. It's relatively small. But then you look at the road infrastructure it takes to support this, and you're looking at another 7% of the entire square mileage of the county is taken up by roads. Here's what's even more interesting. 14% is taken up by parking lots. Again, for those cars that are parked 95% of the time. Then you throw in restaurants. We're gonna take away some of that space because we know that on-demand delivery in food is very important. We take away some retail because we know Amazon and all of our retail delivery is increasing continuously. And then we take a little bit for gas stations because we're all driving electric cars. What we're left with, potentially in our city, and specifically in Los Angeles, is only 61% of our city is not directly impacted by our current car-centric mobility system. That means we get to reshape and reimagine 39% of our cities. How exciting is that? What would we do with 39% of our cities? Would we have more footprint for education so that we can find things to do for all of the maybe truck drivers who are out of work, anyone who's displaced by this massive disruption in transportation? Do we have more distributed hubs? Do we have energy efficiency and we're using them as windmills? Do we have more social spaces? Is it like the High Line in New York where old transportation has become common green space and parks for people? These are questions we get to ask. You get to ask yourselves. You as citizens need and get to influence your governments. And this is the exact kind of thing that we're working on now. Now, here are just a couple examples of what I think is interesting in this. Look at massive warehouses. We're not going to have those anymore. We're going to have distributed depots so that that last mile is very, very efficient, right? Instead of highways separating neighborhoods, we can have social spaces that are joining them and connecting them. Right now, we have large central transit hubs. Imagine more neighborhood-based distributed micro hubs. Imagine when the city of Helsinki has Slush in town, there are specific depots just for that period of time. And on Friday when we all leave, the city can go back to normal. But cities continuously increase and decrease. And our mobility solutions are not able to keep up. They will be. Physical infrastructure gives way to data as infrastructure because how else are you going to allow your city to be responsive? Manufacturing and delivering are separate. Now imagine there's a new kind of vehicle that's making the food while delivering it, that's doing lightweight manufacturing or compilation while delivering it. We're going to see these two things merge as much as possible. And I'm talking about making a car in the back of a truck, but there's a lot of the small, lightweight objects that can be manufactured in delivery vehicles, and we're going to be seeing more of that. Big box retail, what about that giving way to big box warehousing, storage, but pop-up shops that are going to be more available to people in their own communities, so it requires a lot less driving. And also, because of the data we have as infrastructure, we'll know what people want to buy and when. I know that might be scary for the Europeans in the audience. Okay, and then lastly, what this all adds up to is going from car-centric mobility to human-centered mobility. And this really excites me. And I'm very happy that I get to work with these cities to look at that. But we can't get too excited because we still have governments, including Tel Aviv and Boston, who send us faxes of road closures. So not all governments are created equal in terms of technical capability, and we are not yet at self-driving cars. We are still in an era where there's residual faxes being sent with our data. You do what you can. I imagine that our cities are going to look something like this. Less dusty, perhaps, but the point is that it's ephemeral. What's happening in a city today may not be the same thing that's happening in a city a year from now, and that city will be able to adjust. And it's because all of us are willing to share a small bit of anonymized data that can be aggregated so that the city can be smarter and can serve us better. So the 3 takeaways in all of this is right now, we're working on a solution for rapid global experimentation. Again, one city does a pilot and it can be rolled out across every other city. We're getting ready for the transportation revolution, which is not about autonomous cars, but is about transportation as a service and getting most of those cars off the road and using them efficiently. And that is going to reshape our cities. And all of us have an opportunity to be involved in that conversation. So that's what I think about now. Using city as a lab, not just getting from point A to point B, but using transportation as the first-in mechanism to make deep, deep changes in the actual shape and function of our city. Thank you.